So initially I had this big rant with regard to all the big fighter cuts that have been happening of late, and some of the noteworthy names who are no longer with the UFC for one reason or another, or at least are between contracts, and talking about the UFC needing to maintain those fighters to maintain viability as the number one promotion. I'm not saying losing a guy like Rick Story or Ryan Bader or Lorenz Larkin or Misha Serkinov is going to make them not the number one promotion. But what I am saying is it does continue to create cracks that allow Bellator to catch up, and suddenly there's going to be question marks as who has maybe not the best fighters, but they're not all fighting inside the octagon. But it would appear that there is a bigger story on the horizon, as it sounds like, and now this is, of course, it's all speculation, it's all verbally agreed to, that Conor McGregor and Money Mayweather have agreed verbally to the terms for a fight. And, as much as I don't like what McGregor's done right now with his MMA career, winning titles and then jumping to not defending them and jumping to other fights, jumping to other divisions, winning a title there, not defending it, almost not caring, that old adage of you're not really a champion until you defended your title at least once, not applying to him. I don't like that. I'm very interested to see how this does, and if this fight does go down, I will be firmly in the corner of Conor McGregor. Not that that matters, but I will be throwing my support behind him. I don't like, and maybe they're right, and we'll find out if they're right, and quite possibly they could be, but I don't like the way boxing experts are dismissing Conor McGregor's chances. Yes, Floyd Mayweather is a fantastic technician, and maybe Conor can't hold his own. Maybe he can. I don't know, but I'm very curious to see how this goes. I don't like the way they're dismissing it, almost as if, no, it's not going to matter. And then they justify what they say by saying, well, of course, if Floyd were to go and fight a mixed martial arts fight, we know how he'd fare. And they have a good laugh, and they almost dismiss it as that's really not important. I would be curious to see how Floyd would fare if it was a striking match and Conor was allowed to kick in addition to punch. No takedowns, no grappling. So I'd be curious to see how that would go. But either way, I'm certainly, if it does happen, and I think it needs to happen at this point, because we've seen so many other super fights go by the wayside. George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva still could happen, but right now it doesn't look like it's going to be the case. The Ronda Rousey Cyborg fight, it could happen as well, but it would just be stupid at this point. It never happened when it was at its hype. So several scenarios simply, John Jones, Anderson Silva disappearing. So I would definitely like to see this fight transpire. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we are breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night 105, which will take place live from Halifax, Nova Scotia on Sunday, February 19th. It's a Sunday event, so keep that in mind. I will be giving you my predictions for the 5 main card fights, including the main event, the heavyweight main event between Derrick Lewis and Travis Browne. All 5 of my preliminary breakdowns will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Also, at kamikazeoverdrive.net, you will be able to pick up my bet packs for $15 for this event, and I have been on absolute fire this year. UFC 208, I went a perfect 10-0. I picked all 10 fights correctly. And a lot of people will say, yeah, well, there were a lot of heavy underdogs. 100% there were, but I nailed Anderson Silva, questionable decision, but still, I thought he did enough to win it. It's debatable. I certainly can see the other side of things. I also had Bilal Muhammad, which a lot of people got on the Randy Brown train and lost that one. A lot of people were on Holly Holm. I thought Germaine won the fight. I had her as well, backing her. There were several other traps I didn't fall into. My bet packs have been on fire, though, more importantly, and not just the last show. 4 shows into the season this year, through 46 fights, I am 35-11. And keep that in mind, I don't run from fights. I don't avoid picking difficult fights that a lot of people will go out of their way to avoid. I pick them all. So I'm going to lose lots because there's lots of difficult fights. There's lots of upsets. There's lots of upsets that are kind of those situations where you never ever are going to pick the other fighter, not because you're not a smart predictor, just because there's nothing you can see ahead of time that would suggest that underdog is going to come through. That's why you lose. That's a lot of times you lose fights like that, but that's not always the case. Either way, 35-11 to start the year. I'll give you quick numbers for my big bankroll, my bet predictions, which is where I'm focusing more on betting, good size amounts and larger unit amounts on less risky parlays and single bets. Currently, we have wagered 148 units over 4 shows, which is a lot. That's the style I do. We've got a return of 190.58 units, which is just short of a 29% return on your investment, which is very good. A lot of people are 15%, 12%. Again, they don't take a lot of risk. I've taken risk, and so far this year it's paid off. We've had two major positive events. We've had one which is a slight setback, and yeah, that's the way it goes. For my big risk, big reward bet bundle, we have been on fire. I am coming off a massive showing at UFC 208. We bet 30 units and we returned 83.76. So $10 a unit for someone who is, or $5 a unit, anything like that. So for someone who is betting smaller, and when I say smaller, I'm talking, $300 or less on an event. Again, you decide the unit amounts based on how much you're willing to bet. We are returning big amounts. So the overall this year for 4 events, 120 units wagered. We have won 224.18 units. It's a profit of just shy of 105 units overall, or a rate of return on your investment of 86.82%. You've almost doubled your money through the first 4 shows of the year. I don't know if I can keep it up. I'm going to damn well try. Things have been on fire. We'll hopefully keep it rolling. So certainly if you're looking to buy the bet packs, $15 for this show, or you can invest over the next 2 months, save yourself $20 to $25 by subscribing. And either way, consider, if you're having success on your own, please continue to do it, as there are no guarantees. On that note, let's get to predicting that first fight. The opening fight of the night takes place in the UFC's lightweight division as the Irish Dragon, Paul Felder, 12-3-0, takes on Alessandro Alex Ricci with a current record of 10 wins and 4 defeats. Now, this fight was originally scheduled to feature, it's 2 fighters coming together. Felder and Gilbert Burns were originally scheduled to square off, and Ricci and Alvaro Herrera were penciled together. Burns and Alvaro Herrera pulled out. These 2 fighters put together to keep them on the card. Ricci is coming off an unsuccessful debut. I believe he took it on short notice. He lost to Jeremy Kennedy back in August. He is just 2-2 over his last 4. Certainly not rolling, but that was a pretty tough spot to debut in. For Felder, he's coming off a TKO loss to Francisco Trinaldo. The doctor stopped it after Trinaldo viciously cut Felder. He had won back-to-back fights and seemed to get things righted after a little bit of a slump, but that was a pretty big setback. Both guys are 5'11". Felder has a 1-inch reach advantage and is the younger man by 2 years. Looking at the Canadian's record first, he has 5 wins by knockout. He is 5-4 on the scorecards, though. He has gone to decision 9 straight times, aka he knocked out the first 5 guys he faced and has gone the distance in 9 consecutive fights since. Felder, 7-1 in fights ended by knockout, 1 submission win on his record, and 4-2 on the scorecards. He did win a split decision over Jason Sago, another Canadian, fighting in Halifax, same place, back in 2014. So this is not the first time he's fought here, which certainly is a positive for him. Looking at Ricci first, he's a striking-based fighter. Comes from a Muay Thai background. He moves very well. He throws some hard kicks up and down the body. He has a very solid right hook. He'll work in a stepping knee as well, and he can do damage in the clinch. The big knock on Ricci is he's not a high output striker. He sometimes doesn't let his hands go, kind of waits on his opponents too much. In his debut fight, he was getting backed up just a little bit, covering up, kind of almost reacting to the attacks a little bit too much and allowing his opponent to be the aggressor. Now, he did give up 5 takedowns in that fight and spent a lot of time on his back as well. Felder, black belt in Taekwondo and Karate, BJJ blue belt, so a lot of combat accreditations there. He's a very decent counter striker, lots of kicking techniques, works into his onslaught. He'll throw some very hard body kicks against Francisco. We saw that against Francisco Trinaldo. He also will work in a stepping knee, so a lot of similarities between these 2 guys. He has some pop in his hands. We saw him knock out Danny Castillo with a spinning back fist, but his punching is certainly a secondary aspect of his striking arsenal. The biggest knock on Felder is he needs to be more functional with his offense. Less flash, focus on landing more high percentage techniques that do damage, pile up the volume, and certainly, help him put distance between him and his opponent in the eyes of the judges. He hasn't looked for a lot of takedowns over his career, but that's something over his UFC run. But that's something he could look to exploit against Ricci, who clearly has a vulnerability in that area. Both fighters, for the most part, are striking based. Felder, I think, will be the more impactful striker. He will be the more active striker. He should be able to outmuscle Ricci in the clinch. I see him as being the more physically gifted fighter. And, as I said, the takedowns are a possibility, and that's something he could score some key points with. Neither guy has a great record in decisions, but I like Paul Felder here. So my prediction is Paul Felder to defeat Alex Ricci by decision. Fight number 2 on the main card is another bout that's been affected by injury, as the 7th-ranked Sara McMann, 10 wins and 3 losses, takes on the debuting undefeated 4-0 Gina Danger Mazany. I'm going to go with Mazany. I think that's the way it's properly pronounced. Mazany's filling in on roughly 2 weeks' notice for Liz Carmouche, who was forced to withdraw from the fight. For Sara McMann, she's coming into this fight on a bit of a roll. She's got back-to-back wins over Jessica Ai and Alexis Davis. with the division currently, in search of some new contenders, could McMann be on the verge of a push to get her into title contention once again? Certainly a win here would help further those aspirations. Physically, both girls are 5'6". We have a 66-inch reach on both sides. On both sides. And Mazany, she is 8 years younger than McMann, so certainly has that in her favor. Now, Mazany, she has a little bit of UFC experience, but not official. She lost in the Ultimate Fighter 18 elimination round to the eventual winner, Juliana Pena. She dropped the fight by decision. For her career, just the 4 pro fights, 2 knockouts, 1 submission, 1 decision win. She fought in May 2016 for her last bout. Prior to that, she hadn't fought since 2013, and considering she debuted in 2008 as professional and has just 4 fights, inactivity has been a major issue for her career. Now, Mazany, when she fought Pena, she was taken down multiple times. She was really getting beaten up on the mat, and she really struggled with the pressure that Pena brought on the feet. When I have seen her in action and saw her last fight, she looked very aggressive. She was swarming her opponent with short punches along the cage, looked for the clinch, immediately went for a takedown, ground and pound, mounted and ground and pounded her opponent, and just beat her up until the referee forced her. Probably went a little bit longer than it should have gone. I saw her use the gift wrap technique briefly in that fight, which I really liked, and she showed relentless ground and pound until she got the finish. She has the 4 pro bouts on her career, but if you look at her opponents, her 4 opponents are a combined 2 wins and 8 losses. Her last opponent was 2-2. It's the only fighter on her record that actually has a professional win. She has 2. The rest of them are all 0-2. She's only gone beyond the 3-minute mark of the opening round on 1 occasion, so that is something worth noting as well. Not a lot of high quality experience, not a lot of long experience as far as the length of fights. For McMann, it's not surprising, former Olympic wrestler, her success hinges on her wrestling. We say this every time we talk about her. 37 takedowns in her last 8 wins, just 1 takedown over her last 3 defeats. She is at best when she can counter her opponent coming forward, either time their forward push or time strikes, duck under, and level change. She has strong positional control, not a ton of top position activity. She likes that crucifix position if she can get to it, where she will go to work. When she fought Alexis Davis, scored an early takedown, but had an absolute heck of a time controlling Davis from top position, and Davis probably won that round off of her back attacking and nearly catching her. I believe she nearly caught her in a triangle. Could have been a triangle, a modified armbar. I can't remember off the top of my head. Either way, Davis had a lot of success attacking. But McMann, she was getting hit with a lot of elbows, and her face, she said she went back, couldn't see the side of her face, but she showed a lot of heart and a lot of durability and grit coming out in the round 2. She put Davis down and eventually subbed her, which is very impressive considering how good Alexis Davis is on the mat. And we're seeing this could be the key to McMann's run if she can improve that top position submission game to couple it with her wrestling. When she fought Jessica Eye on the feet, not a lot of output. She landed 10 strikes in the opening round. She did hurt Miesha Tate on the feet, but again, she's not a high output striker. She's not an overly gifted striker, but she has some power. And if she can add to that and become a little more comfortable on the feet, that will go a long way. She likes to throw a pretty good right hand. She'll pump out a left jab. Again, she has power when she lets her hands go, but, she has some issues covering the distance and not stepping into her strikes at times. Overall, when you look at Mazany coming into this matchup, she's coming in on short notice, low-level experience, limited experience beyond the opening round, limited activity overall. Those are all negatives against a grinder like McMann, who has an elite-level talent on her side. McMann needs to continue to show improvement with her striking, but most likely she's going to look to use her takedowns in this fight and use that top position pressure to break down Mazany. I think she'll put her on the mat, grind her out, bust her up a little bit with her strikes, and eventually set up a submission to try and show what she's continuing to improve. And my prediction is Sara McMann to defeat Gina Mazany by submission. Fight number 3 in the main card takes place in the UFC's middleweight division, featuring Canadian Elias the Spartan Theodorou, 12 wins and 1 loss, taking on Cezar Muchanche Ferreira with a record of 12 wins and 5 defeats. Now, Theodorou rebounded nicely in his last matchup from his first career loss, coming off a decision win, a little bit uneventful, but still a decision win over the very dangerous Sam Alvey. Ferreira has won 3 in a row after back-to-back KO losses and a 1-3 stretch overall. So certainly he is also surging in the right direction. Both men are 6'1", 3-inch reach advantage for the Brazilian. Elias is the younger man by 3 years. Now, looking at Ferreira first, his chin is a major concern. 4 losses by knockout, and they are all clean KOs. But of late, he has definitely made some adjustments. He's fighting much more patient. He's not rushing into attacks to open up his defense. He's being more opportunistic, which is key. does throw a lot of single strikes, lots of hard kicks. He is constantly looking to manage distance. He throws a big left hand. He will step in with it periodically, and he'll throw the odd hard punching sequence. But again, he doesn't want to commit to the point on his feet where he opens himself up to be cracked. You know, Anthony Smith had his moments of success. He was able to back him up and force Buchecha to cover up. He's not a big volume guy. Just 30 significant strikes versus Smith. Over his last 5 wins, he's averaged just 20.2 significant strikes, which is roughly 7.5 significant strikes per round. You see, he's not going to overwhelm you with his offense. The difference is his takedowns in his top position game. He scored a nice double leg against Hermansson, put him on his back relatively easy, showed a nice timing as Hermansson moved forward, ducking under. Same thing with Anthony Smith. Smith threw a kick. Ferreira changed levels, put him on his back. He's very good in top position. He can use that grinding top position game to really wear guys down and grind them out. He landed 15 takedowns over his last 5 wins. But again, we saw against Hermansson, he's a very good submission fighter as well. Jumped quickly to that arm triangle and finished that fight, and that was big. Statistically, Elias Theodorou has a number of advantages. 3.45 strikes landed per minute versus 2.12 strikes absorbed per minute. So he's good offensively, he's good defensively, and he works at a better rate than Ferreira does. His takedown defense, 41%. Not bad. We did see Bruno Santos put him on his back 4 times in that fight a couple years ago. The takedown defense for Elias is going to be key to his success here if he can stay vertical. Now, traditionally, for Theodorou, pace and pressure have been keys to him winning fights. But that's not always been the case. He's a decent grappler. He'll use his clinch to break down his opponents and just keeps engaging and putting them, in a tough spot simply by outworking them. But against Sam Alvey, he really altered his approach. He used a lot of movement. He used a kick-heavy attack to keep distance and still attack Alvey where he couldn't connect with those big punches. Not a ton of... those kicks weren't all connecting. They were more framing. Limited pop on his connections because they were so... He was landing at the end of his strikes, and then he really wasn't pushing the pace in that matchup. He's got some power in his right hand, not a ton. Throws some hard left hooks. Some pretty good low kicks. He does have a tendency to telegraph his strikes at times. He throws a lot of single strikes without much setup, which can open them up for his opponents to capitalize on. The way I look at it here, Theodorou needs to engage and either outwork Ferreira or crack him on the chin and put him down. Those are his 2 options. He's not normally a guy that knocks a lot of people out with the KO power, but with Ferreira's chin, he certainly could go that route and it could stop him with one punch. As I said before, Cezar has found his success scoring takedowns and grinding out opponents from top position. He's not going to outwork them with punches. He's not the type of guy who's going to put volume on you. He's not the type of guy who's going to one punch knock you out for the most part. He is a top position takedown type of guy. Elias has a tendency to leap into his strikes with minimal setup, and that's going to open him up to counter takedowns, which Ferreira has been very successful with. Once Ferreira gets on top, it's difficult to get out from underneath of him. Could the booing of a Canadian crowd help the referee to stand the fight up quicker than normal? Quite possibly. Once Ferreira gets on top, it's going to be difficult, though, for Elias to do much beyond defend and try to get back up. The lack of offense could make this fight for some boring moments. I don't think it's going to be a crowd pleaser, unfortunately. Elias won't have the grappling edge, which kind of makes him far less effective as a fighter, makes him a little one-dimensional. I think Ferreira's going to score key takedowns and top position control and really grind this fight out. So my prediction is Cezar Ferreira to defeat Elias Theodorou by decision. The 4th fight on the main card takes place in the featherweight division as Sam Sicilia, 15-7-0, takes on the debuting Gavin, the Newfoundland Terror Tucker, undefeated at 9 wins and 0 losses. As I said, Tucker is making his debut for Sicilia. He has lost back-to-back fights, and he's just 4-6 over his last 10 bouts and could be on his last legs in the promotion, especially with the number of cuts they're making. I struggle to see a 4-7 fighter on a 3-fight losing streak still being relevant and kept on, unless they look at it from a financial aspect and say, hey, he's a crowd pleaser. He doesn't demand a lot of money. Let's keep him. I said Tucker's undefeated. He's from Newfoundland, fought once, so that's certainly home advantage there. Definitely fighting in Canada is going to help him out. He's fought once each in 2015 and 2016. Then prior to that, he fought in 2013. So not overly active, but certainly picking up the pace the last little while. He's fought recently. Sicilia, 2-inch height advantage. They are the same age. Tucker comes into this fight 4 wins by knockout, 4 submission wins, and 1 decision. It tells me he's fairly diversified in his skill. He has 4 first-round finishes, including a 37-second head kick in his most recent outing. Head kick KO. Not a ton of top-level experience for the Canadian. The only opponent he's fought in his last 4 that has over a 500 record is Lyndon Whitlock, a solid Canadian veteran. Collectively, though, the 4 guys he's fought, 26 and 26. They're not cans. They're not looking at guys who are like 2 and 12. But for the most part, they are guys that aren't elite level competition. But again, he's a prospect. So aggressive. He has decent hands, hard kicks. He'll work in some good knees as well. He used some fairly short punches in the clinch, which I like. And that head kick was a very solid left high kick that put down his opponent. He's competed in grappling competitions, which is nice to see as well. Diversifies his attack. He's a solid grappler from what I've seen. I saw a very nice back take in one of his submission victories, set up a rear naked choke. Overall, 2 wins by rear naked choke, 2 arm bars on his record. So, he's got a nice diversified record, fairly good skill set overall. Not a ton of top level experience, but again, that's a lot of times the case for guys coming out of some of these outer realms of the regional circuit. For Sicilia, he has some pop in his hands, sure, absolutely, but he doesn't have the type of knockout power that he is routinely touted as having. He has worked to become a bit more of a technical striker, but he will brawl, and recently, and especially in his recent skid, he's got away from being more technical, and I just don't like what I see out of him. He carries a negative striking exchange rate, close to getting hit 1 more strike per minute than he normally hits his opponents, which is certainly concerning. Against Gabriel Benitez in his last fight, he was outlanded 39-19 before eventually being finished. When you look at what Cecilia's done in his victories, he has 3 knockouts, so he does have some pop, 3 knockout victories. He has 2 decision wins that have required him to work his wrestling. In those 2 decision victories, 7 takedowns and some prolonged top position to pick up the victories. When I watch Sicilia fight against Benitez, he just looks like a guy who's there. He doesn't seem like he just doesn't seem motivated anymore, unfortunately. He's still willing to exchange, but he's just going out there and hoping something works for it. Works for him. It's not going to be, a masterpiece. He's hoping to make it ugly and pick up the knockout or outwork his opponent, which is it's tough to do. He struggled with the sharper striking of Gabriel Benitez. He was, simply waiting forward and throwing bombs and hoping something connected. It didn't. The way I look at it here, even though there's not a ton of high-quality footage on Tucker, from what I've seen, he looks like he has the superior technique, and I think he'll be able to outwork Sam Sicilia on the feet. And that chin of Sam Sicilia isn't what it used to be. He's been knocked out and he's been hurt in a number of fights. I think we're going to look for kicks from Tucker to play a big role in maintaining distance, keeping Sicilia out of striking range, out of punching range. That's going to back him off and limit his success. And I think Tucker's grappling will play a big role as well, making it uninviting for Sicilia to look for takedowns. And certainly Sam has had some issues with some submissions, but I like what I've seen of Tucker striking. So my prediction is Gavin Tucker to defeat Sam Sicilia by TKO. In the co-main event of the evening, we have a very interesting middleweight bout for you as Johny Big Rig Hendricks, 17-5-0, takes on Hector Showweather Lombard with a current record of 34 wins, 6 losses, 1 draw, and 2 no contests. Now, what we have here is a former Bellator middleweight champion in Lombard taking on the former UFC welterweight champion in Hendricks. Both fighters were forced to leave the 170-pound division due to struggling with weight cuts. Lombard was more of an experimental. Hendricks that appeared to be where his home was until recently. Hendricks has lost 3 fights in a row in 4 of his last 5. Lombard has lost 2 fights in a row and is winless in 3 after a no contest. He's coming off back-to-back knockouts, the first 2 of his career. This is a very high-stakes fight, not because of title implications, but because Lombard, for all intents and purposes, can be considered a bust. He has not lived up to the hype, and another loss here, and he's probably done with the promotion, I would think. For Hendricks, he is running out of room, and has pretty much, again, gone out there and said, I will retire if I don't win this fight. He's now up at middleweight. If he doesn't have a good performance here in this matchup, what is left for him to do? Both guys are 5'9", which is certainly worth noting. Lombard has a 71-inch reach, which will give him a 2-inch reach advantage. So not the typical advantages a middleweight would have over a guy like Johny Hendricks, who was a little bit short for the most part for welterweight. Hendricks is 5 years younger, and it's probably worth noting that both men are southpaws. Both guys have power, certainly no denying that, but they haven't shown it of late. Hendricks has 8 wins by knockout, the last coming in 2012 over Martin Kampmann. Lombard has 19 wins by knockout, the last coming back in 2013 over Nate Marquardt. Hendricks, he has been heavily criticized for his fighting style in the recent way. He's kind of adapted to his approach. He relies way too heavily on his takedowns, and that's about it. And that will be a major concern against Hector Lombard, especially early on. Lombard's a top-level, elite-level judoka They are traditionally very difficult for wrestlers to take down. Not impossible, but certainly it'll be interesting to see how those exchanges go. A lot of people have suggested the weight cut and the impact on Hendricks' body certainly played a role in the fact that he was forced to rely on his wrestling when he started getting tired and was afraid of expending energy. So we'll see if that's not the case here anymore. Hendricks is coming off a fight where he completed 6 takedowns against Neil Magny and spent a lot of the fight in top position, but lost because he wasn't doing enough. Magny offered some offense off his back, put up a couple of submissions, and stole that fight. I picked Magny to win that fight, and I was happy with the result because I felt he did do more, but still controversial. Hendricks was a good wrestling attack, but again, will he be able to take Lombard down? Okami did take Lombard down 3 times, and Magny put Lombard down once, but that was more due to exhaustion than anything. We have seen Lombard at times rely on his wrestling, 2 takedowns against Dan Henderson, 5 versus Jake Shields. It'll be interesting to see if he can take Johny Hendricks down. Throws and trips, traditionally not something that wrestlers are typically used to dealing with. I would say if Hendricks is going to try and take Lombard down, he needs to shoot that low single from the outside, get at the very base of what Lombard has to offer. Once he tries to get to the midsection, that core body strength is going to make it very difficult for him to put him on his back. Hendricks, in what appears to be another life now, has shown he can win fights with striking. He has shown a lot of volume striking. It was his key to success against Robbie Lawler early, really mixing together some nice combinations, working in his kicks, moving forward behind punches, and then if need be, change levels for a takedown, elevate his opponent, mix that into his striking. That was more of a complete performance. Is he capable of doing that again? I don't know. Lombard, his striking style is certainly a different approach. He likes to sit at range, leap into his attacks, prolong time of inactivity, and that cost him early in his UFC career against guys like Tim Boetsch and against Yushin Okami. He wasn't throwing enough and was getting outworked. He throws a hard right hook. He gauges his distance with his right hand by pawing it out with, but he needs to keep throwing it. Now, his chin, question mark. He was rocked by Henderson early in that matchup. He hurt Dan once he tried to swarm him and eventually he dropped Dan with a left hook. Was swarming on Dan Henderson, very similar to the Neil Magny fight where he tried to get him out of there but couldn't. And that's a big question. If he cannot finish his opponent early and expends that energy, is he done? And it looks like that is the case. Against Dan, he was stunned with a head kick and eventually KO with kind of an odd spinning elbow. And you start to wonder, he's pushing 40. He took a hell of a lot of damage in the Magny fight. Now he's been knocked out by Dan Henderson. Is Lombard's durability and chin gone? Is it further complicated by all that cutting down to welterweight? Did it take too much out of him? Because it was a difficult cut. Both fighters are in tough spots. It's hard to gauge how they'll perform in this situation. Lombard has said he's pushing 40. He's coming off back-to-back knockouts. His cardio isn't great when he's pushed. And if he's not pushed or doesn't push himself, can he be consistently effective enough over 3 rounds? We've seen him do it before, but again, as he gets older, it becomes more difficult. Hendricks, he is younger. He should benefit from not cutting to 170 pounds. That 15 pounds... and it would just kill me if he doesn't make weight for a middleweight. I'll just frig it. I can't, and it wouldn't shock me, but it would just be unbelievable. But that not cutting that 15 pounds from 170 now staying at 185 is going to be a big difference for Johny. Lombard doesn't present the normal reach and height issues that most middleweights will, that I think will keep Johny from having success at middleweight if he does happen to win this fight. I think ultimately we're going to see a close first round. It could be a bit of a staring contest. I think Hendricks is going to stay more active though, chip away at Lombard, avoid those big punches. He's not going to be as drained. He's going to be a little more quick, a little more movement involved. And I think the wrestling aspect for Hendricks might come into play later as Lombard starts to slow down. We could see Johny Hendricks score the KO. He's still got that dangerous pop in his hands. Lombard's chin's a little bit suspect. I expect Hendricks to have a speed advantage, which will help him out. But more likely, I think they go the distance with Hendricks just edging out a close fight. And my prediction is Johny Hendricks to defeat Hector Lombard by decision. In the main event of the evening, we have a pair of heavies, top 10 heavies, if you will, as the 8th-ranked Derrick the Black Beast Lewis, 17 wins, 4 losses, and 1 no contest, takes on Hawaii's own number 9, Travis Hoppa Browne, 18 wins, 5 losses, and 1 draw. Now, this fight was actually promoted to the main event after the Junior Dos Santos-Stefan Struve fight was pulled. JDS now fighting for the title. Lewis is coming off a lackluster TKO victory over Shamil Abdurakhimov. For Browne, he has lost 2 in a row and 4 of his last 6. He lost to Fabricio Verdum, former champion, on short notice. He's coming off that tough fight there. Now, Lewis has won 5 consecutive bouts dating back to his knockout loss to Sean Jordan, but the Roy Nelson fight was a bit odd, a bit underwhelming, and the Shamil fight was pretty disappointing as well, despite the result. Physically, Browne's 6'6", 6'7", depending on what tape measure you use. He is 3 to 4 inches taller than Derrick Lewis. They will have the same reach, 79 inches. Lewis should come in roughly 5 pounds heavier than Browne, certainly different body types. And the Black Beast is the younger man by 3 years. Now, both men have big knockout numbers. This is usually the case when we talk about Derrick Lewis. 15 wins by knockout for Derrick Lewis, 14 wins for Travis Browne. And, both men have a lot of power, but they deploy it in different ways. Most of Lewis's stoppages, not all, we saw Gabriel Gonzaga go down, but most of Lewis's stoppages come from top position. Gets on top of guys, pounds them out. For Travis Browne, most knockouts come against guys while they're standing. Not always the case. We saw him stop, who was it? I believe it was Brendan Schaub on the mat, and I believe he eventually brought the stoppage against Matt Mitrione on the mat as well, or at least did some damage from top position, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, as I said, Lewis takes his opponents down very effective. Very effective once he can take his opponents down. Good top position control, and he will start to unload with power very patiently, but very deadly. He will back his opponents up against the cage, looking for that takedown, and his opponents can take him down. That's certainly a possibility. We've seen him be put on his back on multiple occasions. Pesta took him down 5 times. Roy Nelson took him down 7 times. He won both those matchups, nonetheless. The big issue with Derrick Lewis is he is so good at muscling his way back to top position. Additionally, if you shoot on Derrick Lewis and don't take him down, he's going to turn that defensive position for him into an offensive position. He wears guys out where they look for takedowns and goes to work once he can get into a position that he is in a better spot. When he fought Gabriel Gonzaga, he showed a lot of poise, giving up that early takedown against a BJJ black belt, remained calm, eventually got up, and started creating some separation and went to work. His striking is improving, but it's still a secondary aspect of his offense. I've said that a couple times in the show. He cracked Roy Nelson with some massive shots, but he struggled to get into range against Shamil Abdurrahimov, who was presented a much better striking front than Nelson did. Nelson had slowed down at the point he was getting cracked and really wasn't pairing together a defensive front using jabs and head movement, and Lewis capitalized. We see big kicks from Derrick Lewis, a lot of single strikes. He'll mix in an uppercut. Very hard. He steps into his punches when he throws them. When he knocked out Gonzaga, he caught him on the cage with a big flurry and landed a big right to eventually finish him off. He does have a tendency to overswing a little bit. He'll swing big, can overextend. He will telegraph his punches. You can see them coming if you can recognize that. And that's something Browne needs to capitalize on. He has been knocked out a couple times. He got knocked out by Matt Mitrione walking into a forearm. He got knocked out by Sean Jordan as well. So his chin, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But again, when you're toying around with other heavyweights, all it takes is one shot to put you down. Browne moves very well for a big man. No denying that. That adds to his length. He hasn't been nearly as active on his feet in recent fights, but I'd like to know if that's going to change. They've talked about him changing camps, leaving behind Edmund Terverdian, and if he does that, we could see a brand new striker, a brand new fighter, and that's a good thing for Matt Browne, because he definitely, his style recently has not utilized some of the gifts we saw him use earlier in his UFC career. He's a decent counter striker though overall. He keeps his hands constantly in his opponent's face. I like that. There are eye pokes, but they disrupt his opponent's timing and really gauge the distance. You start pushing forward into that area where he can touch you, he knows to back off. That's very effective. He throws some big kicks. He'll go to the midsection. He'll throw low kicks, head kicks, a nice front kick to the midsection as well. He's got a spearing jab again, distance manager as well with that, and it'll do some damage. He moves away well when under attack, and that makes him very difficult to take down. He's got a pretty decent sprawl. He'll throw those elbows like we saw against Gonzaga and like he did against Josh Barnett, and he's not easy to close on overall. The big thing with Browne, too, is he's not going to be looking for takedowns. He can take opponents down, but that's not his forte, so that's something that we're not going to see out of Browne, at least we shouldn't. And because of that, we're not going to see Lewis get those extra opportunities, added opportunities to counter and get in a position to go to work with his top position game. Browne's chin's a bit of a question mark. We've seen him knocked out on multiple occasions, but Lewis lacks the striking skill to land that one shot. I'm not saying he can't land it, but under most circumstances, he's going to struggle to land it, and that certainly is concerning. Lewis's chin, I said, is a big question mark as well. The step up in competition, though, for Derrick Lewis overall, his fight against Roy Nelson and his fight against Abdurrahimov resulted in less dominant performances than we have seen against lower level opposition. And that's something worth noting. Abdurakhimov, I believe, showed the blueprint to beat Derrick Lewis. I like Derrick Lewis. He seems like a good dude. He seems like a good fighter. But there are ways in which you can beat him, and I think Shamil Abdurakhimov demonstrated how to beat him. Use distance management. Don't close for takedowns. Keep him on the outside. Don't be over aggressive, and strike him. Unfortunately, he couldn't close it out, and Lewis eventually got down. And when Lewis gets on top of you, look out, you're in trouble. But we didn't see that in that fight until late. I think Browne can use that foot, that foot movement, that foot speed, the overall movement, his length, his reach, a superior striking technique, and some power to back Lewis off and keep him from engaging. I think there's a possibility this fight could go the distance. Certainly wouldn't be shocked if it did. But for my money, I think Browne eventually catches him. And my prediction is Travis Browne to defeat Derrick Lewis by TKO. So those are my 6 main card predictions for UFC Fight Night 105 in Halifax. All of my prelim predictions, as always, at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so please don't be afraid to check them out. Certainly consider buying the bet packs. I'm on fire. Can I guarantee I'll continue to be on a roll this show? Absolutely not. Every show is a new show. And the way I do things, I can get on a roll and blow the doors off things and win money to cover the entire year in 4 shows, 5 shows. And then I can have a slump. That's the way things go, unfortunately, because I am a risk taker. I do take more risks with my bet packs, but as you can see, especially if you've been following me this year, things blow up big when they blow up, and when they do well, they do exceptionally well. And blow up, I use it in a positive way. Either way, if you're interested, $15, not cheap. You don't have to go long term. You can lock it in for a couple of months, for 2 months if you want, for 6 shows. 7 shows, save yourself some dollars. Certainly makes it affordable as well. Either way, certainly appreciate the business, the patronage if you're coming to my website and checking everything out. Follow me on KO_predictions at twitter.com. As always, thank you for comments on the video. I appreciate all of that. I get a lot of emails from people, and you know who you are. I always look forward to seeing those names in my inbox and replying as much as I possibly can. If you have any issues logging in when you purchase stuff, make sure you contact me as soon as possible. I do my best to reply as quickly as I possibly can. Nonetheless, let's have a good show, folks. We got a week off after this one, so we'll take a little bit of a break and refresh, get some things done. But thanks for tuning in, guys, and take care.